kind of have an odd habit that I record the entire lecture and then I go back in and record the first slide. So whenever you hear that first slide, it's always going to be my favorite because it means that the lecture is in the books and is ready to go. Um, it was a good lecture. I thought it went well. It's just about an hour long, so it's definitely not too time consuming and tedious. But there is a lot there, and there's a lot of good early steps for your consideration. So I do hope you enjoy it. I didn't mention in my welcome video, but I'd like to include personal pictures for you to look at in the first slide. The the picture from the welcome video was kind of a serendipitous one. It was just a random stop in, I think it was Vermont last summer, and we were just driving through, and I happened to see that shot, jumped out of the car and snapped it. And the video for lecture number one, for what you're seeing now, that's my that's my buddy. That's my son Jacob there. And even though it looks like a very exotic location, it's actually just on the north shore of Long Island. The area was called Camhasset State Park, or maybe it was Sunken Meadow State Park. But either way, it was a cold rainy late fall day, and I just like the way that the vastness of the scene captures him. Anyway, you'll meet more of the family as the semester goes along, and I share some more pictures. In the meantime, I am calling it a wrap. You are just getting started, so enjoy the lecture, and I will catch you in lecture number 2. So let's start a new sequence here of, I believe it's 7 slides. I will say this about these next 7 slides. It's a little more general about action research, but towards the end of it, we do get very specific about our particular sequence for the class. But stick with it because there are some good underpinnings of what it is that we're going to be doing in the next 7 slides. I'm laughing because I'm reading what I wrote here on the next slide, and it's exactly what I said in the last slide. I guess it's an occupational hazard. So, and by the way, sometimes I'll leave my mistakes in just because, why not? A little blooper. So yeah, very general, and it'll be a practical model towards the end of those 7 slides. And look at that title. Take note. So a couple of interesting things about action research. For me, the most important part of this whole sequence is what's highlighted in red at the very top in the first bullet point. Action research has to have some sort of practical classroom implication. And that kind of corresponds to the opposite, which is that bottom bullet point at the very bottom. It is not wholly theoretical. A lot of times in at the doctoral level, it will be a very theoretical, a very theoretical piece of research. But for action research, for us, that section number 4, that last section with the action plan, really dives into that practical classroom implication. As part of the process, action research definitely hopes to take information from multiple sources. Fancy word is to synthesize the information and create kind of your own ideas and your own thinking based off what you've read in the past. And then finally to generate some new ideas from that collected data. It's not a book report. We're not just taking what we've read and putting it into a new set of words and then kind of regurgitating that over and over again. To some degree, the review of literature has aspects of that, of gathering information, but again, that's a small part of the overall. So there is a lot of bullet points and a lot of information here on this slide, but I'm only going to look at the last bullet point. The way I look at action research is an avenue, or I like to use this word a lot, an opportunity for teachers to do research, not for someone else, but to do research kind of for themselves, to collect data for themselves. I think it's been far too long in our profession that someone else dictates to us as teachers what we should or should not be doing in class. To some degree, I'm sure that will exist, going forward far into the future. I don't know if that will change anytime soon. But the more abilities that we could accumulate as teachers and do these things for ourselves, the more we are able to make informed decisions as teachers. Another point of that is that a lot of times the people that are actually doing the research, quote unquote, for us, are not actual teachers. When you think about different programs at different colleges that prepare teachers for the classroom, the dark truth about many programs out there is that classes are not taught by actual teachers. They're taught by professors that have never really been in the classroom before. I remember taking a course in St. John's having to do with curriculum and the sequence of curriculum, and everything that the guy said was good. It was interesting, but in the back of my mind, I kept thinking, dude, you've never stepped foot in a classroom. And even if the professor has stepped foot in a classroom, how long ago was it? Was it during the Reagan administration? You know, it, to some degree, action research gives us the power as teachers to do for ourselves instead of kind of being dependent on others to do for us. To me, that's a very, very important feature of action research. So if you take a look at these bullet points, I'm not going to go over each one of them again. I'll let you kind of read them as I talk through that bottom piece, which is the one that for me stands out, even though I did not highlight it in red this time. Um, as young teacher or as young teachers or as newly minted teachers, which many of you are, um, you're probably not familiar with the idea that education is very faddish. There's a lot of fads in education. Uh, we adopt ideas and we adopt grand schemes, and 4, 5, 6 years later, we drop those grand schemes and we pick up another one, and then we drop that one and pick up another one. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. The cool thing about action research is it cannot be a fad. The reason that it can't be a fad is because once you collect data on something and you've shown its ability either to work or not to work, because sometimes research doesn't always work the way that you think it's going to work. Um, Once you have that data, it can't be a fad because you're showing and you're proving that it does work. Um, from a practical standpoint, and again, being in the DOE for many years, uh, you begin to see these fads and how they have come and gone. And part of the reason that we are a faddish industry is because a lot of times we choose very very big kind of ideas on curriculum and how to present that curriculum without necessarily doing a whole lot of research across many demographics throughout the country. So part of action research is saying, look, what I want to try out and what I want to do in this particular uh, sequence of interventions that I want to try in my class is not something that will necessarily go away because I know that it works. And in that sense, action research is really really important, a really important part of what it is that teachers should be doing going forward. Okay, you ready? Watch what I can do. Right click, pointer, and highlighter. I can now draw on the screen, which is kind of cool. I know, right? Mind blown. So, in this slide, we start to get a little more specific about what your research sequence will begin to look like. This comes directly from your book, so I kind of borrowed that. Hope they don't mind. And if you take a look at this cycle, it very much mimics the steps that you're going to be taking in the very very near future. We're going to start with identifying an area of focus. Once we've identified the area of focus, we'll very much move into collecting data and then eventually analyzing and interpreting data. Once we've done all those steps, we are going to develop an action plan based off that data. I'm hoping that what I'm saying right now is kind of ringing a bell from when we spoke last about the different sections of your thesis. Remember there were 4 sections? Well, take a look. 1, 2, 3, and 4. So these 4 sections very much mimic the assignments that are going to be due this semester. The one part of this that we are not going to be able to do just because we just simply don't have the time is this one, which is kind of going back. A lot of times in traditional data collection, you're not getting the type of data, or you're not getting the data that you're looking for. So there is the opportunity to go back and kind of begin the data collection process again. Same thing with the analysis. Sometimes you begin to analyze data and you realize, man, I'm just not getting what I need. So you go back to data collection. We are not going to have time for that. When I did my doctoral research, I did do that, meaning that I did my area of focus. I started collecting light data, meaning like here and there, and I called it like a little pilot study. From my pilot, I realized that I was doing things that I probably could do a little more effective or efficiently. So I went back and restarted the process. But for us, we're just going to kind of plow forward. One last little thing here. You see that last little arrow? We are not going to do that last little arrow because we will end it at your action plan. That last little arrow is for those of you that do want to continue your studies into a postgraduate degree. Certainly your doctorate would be an example of that, where you could very easily take this thesis and transfer it to a much larger study or into a different area of focus. So we'll leave that last little arrow for. With this last slide, I hope to put a little bow tie on this idea of action research and how action research is going to apply to us. These 7 bullet points are taken directly from your textbook. Throughout different parts of the textbook, I kind of put them into a single slide. And what I like about these 7 is that they very much do follow the sequence that we'll be following. We may not necessarily call it by the labels that are presented here, but the idea and the theory behind each one of these bullet points will certainly be a part of the sequence that we're going to take as researchers. The part that we should note, the bullet points that we should note, are probably the first 3 or 4 bullet points. And the reason that we're going to take special note of those is because those are the ones that we're going to cover in the first semester. And then as we get to the bottom 3 or the bottom 4, that's when we'll transition to that second semester course. Very much where we're going is in selecting the focus and clarifying the theories. And that obviously will be the initial push here with your early lectures. So that kind of puts an end to that little sequence. Let's take a look at the next one here. Your question for today is, what are the 2 types of research that are commonly used in education today? For your first one, if you answered qualitative research analysis, then you are correct, or at least half correct. Qualitative research. I'm sure you've heard of the term before. I'm sure you've heard of the next one, which I'm not going to let the cat out of the bag. But as far as qualitative research, it's a very holistic approach to the collection of data. And what it essentially tries to accomplish is it tries to gather different experiences using a kind of like a sensory approach. And in many regards, qualitative data very much relies on the five senses in order to give the reader an accurate depiction of the data that is being observed in a particular environment. I happen to like qualitative data a lot. I like being able to explore different aspects of an environment that I'm collecting data in. It does require some I wouldn't say strong writing skills, even though I wrote that at the very, very bottom, but it does require more writing skills than perhaps the numerical collection of data. But it's a very nice way of kind of filling in the blanks of what we would consider to be traditional, numbers data. Uh, Take a look at the next one. If you entered quantitative data for your second answer, then congratulations, you are the big winner of the evening. Quantitative data is more of a numerical approach to data collection. I think for the most part, it's when someone says I'm collecting data, we tend to look at quantitative data as the default data collection process. And even though there is the qualitative side, most people just tend to kind of focus on the quantitative side. Quantitative data is a little more restrictive in the sense that there are very predetermined set of interventions, and it really tries to focus and hone in on one particular aspect of your research. We'll eventually call that your independent variable, but we'll get there eventually. You do have to have some strong sense of numerical calculations. This is where Microsoft Excel will definitely come into play for us as a learning community. But here you have two very, very classic ways of collecting data, which is the qualitative side, which is experiential, and quantitative, which is numerical. For us and our data, we are going to be using a mixed methods technique, meaning that you're going to be collecting both qualitative and quantitative data as part of your research. When I first started teaching this course way back when, I used to give students an option of whether they wanted to go qualitative or quantitative. And what I began to notice is that when I was lecturing on qualitative ideas, the quantitative people would zone out and fall asleep. When I was doing the quantitative, the opposite would happen to the qualitative people. So a really easy fix to that is what you're going to be doing, and that is that you're going to be collecting both types of data. Practically, I think it's a good system because it exposes you to a wide variety of data collection, and hopefully it'll add a different level of interest for you as researchers. Ooh, she's a hot one today. Perfect afternoon to record a couple of different slides here. So as promised in the last slide, which I recorded a couple days ago, haven't gotten back to it in a little while. We were beginning to talk about some content, and the way that we're going to begin this conversation is a quick overview of all the different parts of your research thesis, or what I often refer to as your research article. So let's jump in here and let's take a look at what's to be expected for the semester. In front of you now, you have all 5 sections of your thesis, which we are going to write this semester and the next semester. If you remember back to the welcome video and some of the other content that I've presented to you, you'll probably start to recognize that section 1, 2, and part of 3 are going to be the responsibility of this semester, and then the other half of 3, 4, and 5 are going to be for next semester. Now, I do have individual slides for each of them, and then we'll go into further detail in later lectures about each one of these, and we'll talk about each one of these more in depth. But for now, I wanted you to see kind of the grand overview, the entirety of what's expected for you. This particular set of lectures that I published in this batch are all for section number 1, your introduction. So that's going to be our primary responsibilities for this early part of the semester, and then with the next batch we'll move on to the review of literature, so on and so forth. So let's take a couple of minutes here and go through each one a little bit more in depth. It's not going to give you everything that you need in order to write, but remember, we're building layers of knowledge for you, kind of one slide on top of the other. So let's take a look at section number 1 in the introduction. The way that I often look at section number 1 is I look at it kind of as an opportunity for a researcher, for a writer, in order to bring the reader into your research. And the way that most researchers would go about doing that with the section number 1 is that they would begin to create a framework for what it is that the research was hoping to accomplish. There's a couple different techniques that we'll go over when the time comes to fully explore section number 1. But for now, what's important to take away from this slide is that you're going to have to establish some sort of importance of the study, some sort of need and a reason for your research. As part of that, in order to define that a little bit further, I'm in bullet point number 3. We're going to have to write down some problem statements. We're going to have to write down some key questions, and then finally, we're going to really hone in and kind of bring a laser type focus with your hypotheses. After you've accomplished that with section number 1, then we're going to hit the reader with 3 good solid anchor articles in order to really establish that particular need. Those 3 articles are going to very much play a role in your review of literature. So it's almost like the end of section number 1 is already beginning to tie in section number 2 to create that cohesive piece that we're looking for. And I'm going to mention this again, even though I've mentioned it a couple times, but I want to be very specific about it. If things are still fuzzy right now, it's okay. We're embryonic in what it is that we're trying to do. But remember, with each particular slide, and as you accrue information about the different tasks that are going to be asked of you, kind of keep them in the back of your mind and engage with previous information as we go through it. So for now, section number 1, that's a good kind of brief overview about what's to be expected. Looking at section number 2, which is going to be your review of literature, and also will be the primary assignment for this semester. At its most basic level, section number 2 is it's going to be a space where you're going to help the reader begin to understand some of the finer points and some of the theoretical backgrounds that have to do with your particular research. It may be hard to envision that right now, but my feeling is that once section 1 is out of the way and your topic is established and the problem that you're trying to rectify has been kind of rooted in your writing. Once you get to section 2, then you begin to examine the smaller pieces having to do with that topic, and as you collect articles, you're going to essentially demonstrate to the reader what it is that you're trying to accomplish with your research. The 3 anchor articles from the last section are going to be very much in play in your literature review. They're going to serve as a model and a basis for it. And then you're also going to add 7 more sources for a total of 10 sources in your review of literature. Once again, fear not. We'll go over how to write it, what should go into it, how to select the articles, that whole jazz. but that is kind of the intention of the lectures. For now, your takeaway from this slide is that the review of literature is going to be 10 articles that are going to establish a need to help the reader understand your research. The term here is methodology. And for those of you that are ELA teachers or have taught ELA in the past, you know that every single year you teach those students a how-to piece, how to do something. Last year I was teaching part-time for a couple periods a week in a third grade class, and we wrote a how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Well, a methodology is nothing more than a more complex and detail-oriented how-to of your research. How are you going to collect the data that you need in order to prove or disprove your hypothesis? And I kind of slowed my pace there a little bit, because that prove or disprove is the correct terminology in regard to your hypotheses. Your methodology will be fairly detailed. I'll talk about some samples and some procedures and definitely some instruments that you're going to use in order to collect your data. But this would be the real estate and the space where you're now going to delineate all those kind of main steps that you're going to take as part of your research. For some reason, section number 4, data analysis, seems to trigger a certain phobia among teachers. I think for a very long time, data analysis has always been synonymous and associated with numerical findings. And I'm sure there's a whole host of you out there that are numerically inclined and perhaps even teaching in the math field. However, for us as researchers, the data analysis section is going to be an important time and an important space where we're going to now present to the reader all the different findings that we've accumulated over the course of your particular research. Remember, we're actually cooking with fire here. We're actually making something. You're actually going to be collecting data at some point during the year. Your data analysis is the point in which you actually present the findings to the reader. Another small point here is that data analysis, even though we've associated it with quantitative data, remember that our research will also have qualitative data. So that will all be kind of rolled into your data analysis section. And to some degree, once your data analysis section is completed, it's kind of a nice time of the year, because it would indicate and mean that your research project is actually coming to an end. There are going to be very clear ways that we're going to present the data, which obviously will be the source of the lectures during that time period. And then at the very end of your data analysis section, you're going to determine whether your hypothesis was proven or disproven. The good news about section number 5 is that by the time it pops up on your radar, we'll be well into the spring semester, and my hope is that you'll be looking towards graduation, or at least well on your way there. As far as the content for section number 5, it is a kind of a culminating event to your research. And if you look at it through the lens that I've tried to demonstrate to you early in the semester, which is that the research is to make us better teachers, what section number 5 hopes to do is to take the data that we've accumulated, to take all those little data points that we've brought together to prove something, and now give the implications of how those data's plural, how those data are going to now inform our decision-making process going forward in our classrooms. As part of that, and I guess the main thrust of it is that we're going to be creating some sort of action plan, meaning that we're going to then in section 5 delineate what are some of the actions that we as teachers would take based off our data. Whereas section number 4, the data analysis, does tend to cause some anxiety among students. Section number 5, in my view, is more of a relaxed writing piece. It's not something that you're writing from, it's writing that you're kind of creating on your own. Therefore, there's a little bit more creativity in nature, and I think it makes the writing flow just a little bit. All right, so that is it as far as your 5 sections. Not too bad, right? It's not terrible. I know it may look like a mountain. It may look like a mountain in front of us now, but fear not. There have been dozens, no, hundreds, maybe even thousands of students just in your boat that have climbed over the mountain, and we're going to do it together. So as we stand collectively looking up at the mountain we're about to climb, I'd like to make things hopefully a little bit easier for you. And over the course of the years, I've kind of developed this little bit of a format that each one of the sections is going to carry, and I'd like to explain that just a little further. The formats that I'm going to give you for each section come in the package of a subheading. And the subheadings are, in some ways, supposed to eliminate what does Perez actually want this to look like. What is it supposed to be? What am I supposed to write here? And the subheadings each have a very particular purpose. They kind of help you divide and conquer what could otherwise be a very large task. If you look at section 1 with your review of literature, I don't want you to look at it as, a 10, 12-page paper or whatever it is. I want you to begin to look at it as, look, this subheading has to fulfill this requirement. And that format that I present to you hopefully will allow you to do that and kind of create these little natural places that you could write and then put it down like a natural resting point right there in the middle of the screen. Like a little natural resting point, so it's not just kind of this endless type of writing that gets people, frankly, that gets people lost to some degree. So each section will have a particular format. I have one more slide on that, which we will look at now. And unlike most of what I present to you in lecture, which is mostly about giving you different choices about avenues and ways for you to move forward, formats and subheadings are not a recommendation. They are a hard guide that I would like for each of you to kind of follow. I have heard the complaint of, Perez, if I follow the format 100%, it'll be taking away all individuality from my work. And to some small degree, this is true. However, I've always felt that your flavor, your color, your expertise as a researcher, because you do have expertise, will shine through in the content of those subheadings. But if you will allow me, I want to help you set up a organizational pattern for your paper. Without that organizational pattern, whether it's mine or your own or whatever it is, I've tried it before. It just doesn't work. It's so easy to get lost in the woods and just start circling with your writing. So with that said, the formats and subheadings will be a hard guide for your work, and I do believe that in the end, though, that it'll make your writing life just a whole lot easier. Let me take a look. I think this is the end of this little section. Let me see. Now that you have a good understanding of the different sections of your research and what's to eventually be expected, I'd like to fill the next couple of slides with some initial steps, and I'd like to explore those initial steps through understanding that research is often based off a particular problem, a particular issue that a researcher has with their environment. By nature, this will create an inquiry-based approach. Let's talk about those two key terms in the next slide. There are quite a few advantages to starting a research project with a problem statement or with identifying a particular problem. For me, the one primary advantage is that if we could establish a problem that we're looking to fix, if we could have a problem that we're looking to correct from the very beginning, by nature, your research will also be very practical in nature. And that's kind of an important concept for me to get through to you early in this process, is that as we look for problems in practice, as we look for something in our professional environments that are observable and things that we could take action upon, that this actually is a very solid foundation on which to later turn around and say, okay, if I see the problem, then I could fix the problem with X, Y, and Z. And now I'm going to measure whether X, Y, and Z actually help to fix the problem. It's almost like you can kind of start to see the connecting dots going forward into the future with what it is that you're going to do in the research project, but yet the kernel, the genesis, the starting point is going to be to have that professional or educational issue that you could identify within your environments. Leading to that to the right hand column, once you're able to establish a problem and it's a worthwhile and wholly beneficial type of resolution, it leads to the inquiry process. And the inquiry process is almost like an overarching question and problem that you're going to answer throughout the course of your research. Let's take a look at some of the finer points in that idea. As a general rule, just generally speaking, humans have a problem with certain stimuli that comes at them when it very much conflicts with a person's established philosophy or their paradigm and their outlook on a particular field. The reason that I mention this here is because sometimes new teachers don't necessarily have their educational philosophies or their educational paradigms that well developed. Because of that, it sometimes gets a little bit tricky to say, you know what, that is a worthwhile problem to explore versus that which you say, you know what, it kind of doesn't bother me all that much. When you can begin to establish a belief system, when you begin to understand how certain problems that arise in your classroom affect you, you're more attuned to the problems that may arise during a particular school year. If you go back to something I had said a couple slides ago, which is that we are actually looking to solve a problem with our research. Well, I'd like to take this slide and the next in order to help you understand what are some of the ways that we could look at a problem, specifically an educational problem, and say, you know what, I think that's a problem I want to fix with my research versus another one which, frankly, doesn't really bother me because it doesn't conflict with my paradigm. Let's talk about these philosophies just a little further here. I like to use this particular slide in a couple of different ways. The first way that we're going to use this slide is I'd like to present to you a short list of kind of guiding questions that I believe are going to help your thinking and hopefully extend your thinking just a little bit further regarding your educational philosophy. A second way that I'm going to use this slide is later on, as I begin to show you a little model at the end of this lecture. I'm going to come back to these actual questions and use them as a basis. But let's put that aside for now, and let's talk about how these questions might serve to extend your thinking towards a practical educational philosophy. And I'm going to use bullet point number 3 there. What expectations do you have for your students in your classroom? So I'm going to kind of just make up a little bit of a random one right now just to give you an idea. When I use this again for the model, it'll be a lot more specific. But for now, let's talk about the expectation of homework. Yeah, I expect that students will have homework done by the morning, by the next morning. That is my philosophy. That is my paradigm as far as homework. So what happens next morning, right? It's 8:10, the bell rings, and you say, everyone take out your homework, and you go around the classroom, and what do you notice? That my expectations have not been met because either the homework is not done or the homework is lousy, and percentage-wise, I'm not getting the response that I need for my philosophy, for my expectations. Did you hear it there? Did you hear the problem? That's what we're looking to solve. We're looking to solve the problem that arises when my philosophy, in this case my expectations, conflict with what it is that I'm seeing inside that classroom. When you align the answers, last bullet point there, when you align the answers to the question that's been presented, what you essentially get is an inquiry-based research project. Let's look at that a little bit further in the next slide. In the last slide, I presented to you some pretty big concepts and pretty big ideas about philosophy and how there's conflict within a philosophy. With this slide, I like to get into the nuts and bolts of it and actually talk about where would a philosophy idea come from within you personally, you the student. And I like to demonstrate three different resources to some degree. The first resource I like to show you is the idea of a knowledge base, meaning that Brooklyn College, hopefully to some degree, has given you a solid knowledge base from which to draw upon your philosophy. We've all had different classes, and we can kind of be facetious about what we've learned and what we haven't learned. But I think for the most part, Brooklyn College classes have given you at least a beginning to understand what's going to go into becoming a teacher. For the most part, that knowledge is part of what your philosophy is. You contain it. It's already within you. A second one is going to be your experiences that you've had already, whether you're observing as a student teacher, whether you're actually teaching, whether you go back to perhaps even your own experiences as a student in high school or whatever your previous educational experiences. Those experiences are part of what might make up a philosophy. And then the last one is your preconceived ideas of what to expect from an educational environment. And we all have those. We all have preconceived ideas for that process. If you take all three of them and you kind of roll them up into a nice uniform mass, what you essentially have is a depository of resources for you to now give some thought to what you think a particular philosophy might look like for your particular educational environment. As a side note, for those of you that are still looking for work or are going to be looking for work in coming months, one of the questions that my AP, my assistant principal, asks every single interviewee that comes to my school is, what is your educational philosophy when it comes to, and then she'll put something at the end of it. So not only are these three things good to know for your research and identifying a problem, but also practically speaking for any interviews that you might have, probably is a good answer to have in your back pocket. Let's tie up some loose ends between the problems in practice and your philosophy. And I think after this, we'll head into your try it now slide, right? Try it now slide, which will be the first of the semester for you. But for now, going back to the original premise here, once you are able to establish a philosophy, and hopefully the problem and the issues within that philosophy become evident to you, what essentially you're going to be doing is you're going to be evaluating the practices that you're observing or that you're teaching within. Once you're able to evaluate those current practices and specifically specific parts of your professional environment, the end result by nature will be that you've identified your problem in practice, and you have now begun the idea of establishing an inquiry based approach for your research. Let's take a look at the try it now slide, and hopefully that will also tie up a few more loose ends. This is your first try it now slide of the semester, and before we actually begin to talk about the content of the try it now, the task, I'd like to briefly revisit the kind of the three different reasons why we use a try it now, or why I present to you a try it now during the lectures. So the first one is that the try it nows are going to be kind of a practice activity. They're going to be something that you're going to use in order to practice what it is that we've said over the past couple of slides. A second reason why I'd like to institute a try it now is that a lot of what you're going to be doing within that try it now, and some of the writing that you're going to do within the try it now, has a very direct correlation to your semester assignments. And I'll give you a practical example to that. In this particular task, when we talk about problems in practice and identifying those problems, I know that in section number 1 there's a subheading that says educational problems or the research problems, something to that effect. Whatever you write down in your try it nows is going to serve as a springboard and a platform for you in order to begin that writing. It may not necessarily complete the writing for you, depending on how much time you dedicate to the try it nows, but at the very least, if you're able to write a sentence or two, maybe even a little bit more, what you're going to find is that when you do sit down to write, it almost serves as a resource for that particular writing. The last reason that I bring in these try it nows is because if there is places that you do struggle, or something that you would like further clarification on, sometimes I as a teacher like to use the try it now as a platform for that discussion. So with that in mind, the first bullet point there is a little suggestion, and that suggestion is that you use your favorite word processor page, whether it's Microsoft Word or one of the online word processors, and make that file for yourself, make that page for yourself, in which you continuously kind of like update the different try it nows as they're presented in lecture. Over time, what you'll find is that you're accumulating the information and the resources that you need in order to make your writing that much easier. As far as the actual task of this try it now, what I'd like for you to do is I'd like for you to give some thought as to your educational philosophy, and how perhaps what you're seeing and what you're observing and what you're a part of is beginning to conflict with that philosophy. In order to help you further, what I did was on the next slide, and also within the link below, is I gave you a list of different places throughout the course of a professional day, of a professional educational day, that you could look at in order to examine just a little further. We'll take a look at those in just a second. You are going to be writing a sentence or two. I shouldn't say you are. You have the option of writing a sentence or two regarding that philosophy and perhaps how it conflicts. And by the way, these try it nows are optional. You don't have to turn them in. You don't have to show them to me. However, if you do want to share them with me and you do want me a part of the process, remember, I'm here as much as you need me to be here. So this is something that can definitely be shared. Last little piece, last little bullet point there. If you come to something that you're seeing on the next slide or within that website below that you're not sure of, and the answer to that is you know what, I don't have a strong philosophy on that just yet, it doesn't always mean that it's a dead end, that I should just move on to something else. Maybe you just need to read a little bit further about it in order to develop that philosophy just a little further. Let me show you the next slide, and then we'll wrap this up here. I'd like to further assist you in the Try It Now task by listing a few of the educational domains that may influence a teacher's professional day. And the purpose for listing these little influences is so that you begin to see where does your educational philosophy fit within these bullet points. And that's kind of like the final question there. So, for example, let's say now you're looking at different instructional methods, and you're writing a philosophy about different instructional techniques that are important to you. Of course, with the critical eye that you're going to now perhaps look for issues within the instructional methods. What I'm hoping this list will do for you is help you realize that sometimes an educational philosophy doesn't have to be all that big or all that grand. It could live within any one of these bullet points, and perhaps that will help you narrow your focus to some degree. I'm gonna wrap up this little piece. I do want to say more, but I'm scared that I'm gonna muddy the water if I keep going here. So I'm gonna leave the task. I'm gonna leave the task right here. Give it a shot. Write a couple sentences. If you want to get crazy, you could certainly write a paragraph about some different educational philosophies that you might have. You may not necessarily use every single point that you write here, but my feeling is that within your writing, you will find that philosophy that you want to kind of hold on to and carry forward with you throughout your research. Okay, good luck with the Try It Nows. Again, they are optional. You don't have to turn them in. There's nothing that you have to do with them. They are for you. If you do want to share them with me. By all means, I am here to read them and assist. With the next sequence of slides, I'd like to end the lecture by giving you a very practical model for us to examine and take a look at. Hopefully that will help deepen your level of understanding from what has just been said. Real quick before I show you the model, this particular sequence of slides and this particular model has a couple of different purposes that I'd like to mention to you here. The first one is the most practical, which is I want you to begin to see how identifying an educational problem and understanding your educational philosophy will lead to the research sequence, which is what we're looking for. However, the secondary purpose of it all is that it is a general model that I'll be using throughout the course of the semester. So even though you're being introduced to it now, I do draw a lot of examples from this particular model in future lectures. It won't be the only model that we look at. There'll be other models included during the course of the next couple of months. But for the most part, I try to stick to this one. So let's take a look at it right now. The way that I approach this slide and really this entire little sequence here is I put myself in your shoes, and I wanted to look at the task by starting at square number 1. And in order to do that, I took a couple of slides that I had mentioned to you previously, just now in this lecture, and one was with the philosophy and one was with the classroom domains. And the question that you have in the first bullet point, how do you believe students learn best, was a question that I had presented to you several slides ago. So I'm going to pretend to do the do it now task, the try it now task, and the sentence that you see under it is what I would have answered had the question been proposed to me. And I'm gonna read the actual answer here so we can get a good indication. So how do you believe that students learn best? And yeah, I do believe that students have a way of learning and have best practices, and that if you give students like the right opportunity and the greatest opportunity in order to access the information that you present, they're going to understand the material better. There are ways that we can impact how students learn best. Fair enough? Good. What domain do I want to put it in? Where am I looking where does this philosophy live? So I chose the instructional methods bullet point, and now I kind of want to combine them here. I have my philosophy that students learn best within the instructional world, within my classroom world. How do they learn best? Students learn best when given preferred environmental conditions. And I highlighted the word environmental conditions because I thought that was important to me, in the sense that I am now examining how my philosophy fits in the environment in which the students are learning. That is square one for us. That's the premise from which I am creating. Now I'm going to hit the fast forward button with the next slide, meaning that I'm going to kind of magically put this all together for you so you can see the connection. In future videos, we'll talk about how that magic happens. We'll talk about those steps leading up to it. But for now, look at how the idea that students work best in certain situations, in certain environmental conditions, leads to my model study. Have a look. Let's continue that thinking here with some primary components of my model study. And remember, this is a fast forwarded slide, so in my head I know that I'm going to have two groups. I'm going to have a regular group of students and a test group of students. Gotta test out something, right? I gotta try something. That idea, the topic there, the classroom lighting, think back a second. What does that represent? The classroom lighting, and I'm just going to think out loud here. Classroom lighting is demonstrating something that has to do with the classroom environment. Oh, so in the last slide, I spoke about how I'm going to match the preferences for an opportunity to learn for some sort of environmental change. And what is that environmental change going to be? I decided, because it's in the instructional domain, that it's going to be the lighting of the classroom. That's the highlighted words in the slide before. That is going to lead into now, well, how am I going to study that classroom lighting? And then the intervention is the last one. The researcher will examine the differences between the different types of lighting during academic activities. I hope you can see it. I hope you can see the building process of understanding that I have a philosophy. The way that philosophy looks like in my classroom environment has to do with the actual physical environment of that class. When I put it through the lens of the researcher, then I discover that I believe that the classroom lighting is going to be the centerpiece of what my eventual intervention, how I'm going to solve the problem will look like. Now that I have a good idea of what my problem is and how I may solve it and in what domain it exists, once that is initiated and once that is expressed through data collection, I now need to measure whether my intervention worked. Let me put it into specific terms. I now need to figure out whether that classroom lighting experiment that I did by changing the types of lighting during academic activities, if it worked or not. When you think about it, it's such a key component, because a lot of times we try things as teachers, but we don't actually know whether they worked. In this research model, we are now going to determine whether that intervention was effective or ineffective. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to measure different things. In this case, I chose 4 different measurement tools: teacher-made assessment, the student reading rate, classroom observations, and student interviews. By using those 4 measurement techniques, I can now determine whether that classroom lighting intervention was effective or not. Okay, so let's think this through by reviewing the process for ourselves really quickly through four different questions. So the first question is what was the problem that I was looking to solve, and the problem that I was looking to solve was something that had to do with the environmental stimuli that my students were being exposed to during academic settings. Great, that was established through my philosophy and through discovering what the true problem was that I was looking for. When I put it into the intervention model, when I put it into what domain it existed, I discovered that my stimuli, my intervention, was going to be having to do with the lighting in my classroom, whether it be the fluorescent white lighting or the softer yellow lighting or dim lighting versus bright lighting. I knew that I wanted to do something with that stimuli. I knew I wanted to do something with that classroom environment. Moving on further, just moving on to the next question, how would you test for the effects of the study? Oh, well, that one and the last one are quite easy because I know that I have a teacher-made test, I have some interviews, I have some observations, and I have those measures already in place. In essence, what you're seeing in this kind of culminating slide is how quickly the concept can come together for you if you begin by establishing what the problem is very early in the process for you. And that's what I'm hoping that you gain from this video, and more specifically from the try it now. I'm gonna wrap up this little sequence, and in fact I'm gonna wrap up the entire video because I'm coming to an hour now, and I would like to move on. As always, you have any questions, you have any comments, by all means, David Perez 11230 at AOL. Shoot me a quick email. I love getting emails. It doesn't bother me to get questions and comments. So you are free to do so. All right, humans of 7680. It is Taco Tuesday here in the Perez household, and I do smell something delicious cooking downstairs, so I am going to end this video just about right now. A couple parting words here. First off, I hope the lecture went well for you. I know it's like the first lecture where I actually provide content for you. Hope it was clear. I guess one of the drawbacks of being virtual is that I don't know if it was clear or not, but I'm gonna rest assured that I did my best in trying to get that information out to you. By all means, I know I said in the last slide, but I'll say it again here. If you do have any questions or comments, don't hesitate. David Perez 11230 at AOL. In the next video, we are going to get very, very practical, and we're going to talk about building section number 1 and start talking about some of the different components that are going to go in there. Even though we are building section number 1, we're actually going to be also building your research project. So that will all be part and parcel of the next video. All right, folks, you take care of yourselves. Hope you're having a great day whenever this is for you. I'm gonna go record slide number 1 and then call it a night. Bye, folks.